Good morning and welcome to week 11 of Pacific Northwest Sports Weekend Updates. Really quick here, we got some really good games to discuss, and guys, it is getting towards the end of the year, so playoff discussions at all levels are heating up. To start off, your UW Huskies played Penn State for their first ever game in Happy Valley, and unfortunately didn't fare so well as they lost 6-35. UW's going to play UCLA next week, hoping for that bounce back. Then we go over to your WSU Cougars who played Utah State and won 49-28. Now go Cougs go. This might be the most dominant win Wazoo's had all year, but they're going to need to keep winning if they want a shot at playoffs. But if this weekend is any indication of what's to come for the rest of the year, Wazoo has a very real shot at potentially making it there. Player of the game, Wayshawn Parker. He had 11 carries for 149 yards and 2 touchdowns. BSU plays New Mexico next week. Utah State plays Hawaii next week. Now over to Eastern Washington, who they played Northern Colorado and won 43-15. Now at one point, Eastern Washington was up 29-0, where Northern Colorado was able to go for that 2-for-1. Remember, we brought that up 2 weeks ago. We've had it now last week. It's when you score right before halftime and right after halftime. But they were able to go for a 2-for-1 and cut the possession to 2 leads in the early third quarter. But from there, Eastern would continue to execute and win the game comfortably. Player of the game, Efton Chisholm, 10 receptions, 93 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Eastern will play Idaho State next week. Now, your Central Washington Wildcats played Sul Ross State, and they won 66-0. Now, coming off a heartbreaking loss last week, it was nice to see the Wildcats get back to dominant form, to the point of 66 straight points. No player of the game. When things are that dominant, we try to avoid that as much as possible. Central will play against Western Oregon next week in a nice rivalry game. Now, your Pacific Lutheran Lutes played against Linfield, and they lost 38-10. Now, PLU is a very good team who hasn't lost in over a month, but that all changed against Linfield, but that's not to blame. Linfield is known for being as dominant as they are. Now, they weren't able to run the ball at all, and they had 4 turnovers. The Lutes did have an interception of their own, but they also couldn't capitalize. They also had 2 fumbles they forced, but didn't recover either one of them. Player of the game, Luke McNabb, 12 carries, 73 yards, and 2 touchdowns. PLU will play Puget Sound next week, and Linfield will play Whitworth next week in a game that decides the Northwest Conference for the second year in a row. Now, your Puget Sound Loggers played against Lewis and Clark, and they lost 28-55. Now, the score was 42-14 at halftime, and Lewis and Clark let out some frustration this game. Now, it doesn't have one stat that really defines the dominance, so much so that it really just kind of happened. Player of the game, and I'm going to try to get this right. It's Owa Kamakawalwuli. I bet you I butchered that. But he went 18 of 25 for 4 touchdowns. Puget Sound will play PLU next week. Lewis and Clark will play Willamette next week. Now, your Whitworth Pirates played against George Fox and won 31-0. Now, Whitworth won comfortably against George Fox as they controlled both sides of the ball. But the Bruins came into this game being second in the conference in yards allowed per game. And Whitworth actually did struggle in the first half. In fact, Whitworth didn't score a touchdown until the second quarter. The next couple of drives ended in a blocked field goal and an interception. Now, this interception changed the game. At the 4-yard line, George Fox decided to go for a screen pass to get some breathing room. Instead, it was picked off and returned 4 yards to set up another Whitworth touchdown for them to go up 14-0 into halftime. From there, the Pirates would keep their foot on the gas and wouldn't allow George Fox to get into a rhythm. Player of the game, Luis Salgado. Now, he didn't have a touchdown, but he was the bell cow as he rushed the ball 14 times for 139 yards. Whitworth will play fellow undefeated school Linfield next week. George Fox will play Pacific next week. Now over to Oregon, where your Oregon Ducks played against Maryland, and they won 39-18. Oregon was amazing. There really isn't much to say. Oregon's going to roll, and we're just going to watch as they look towards the Natty. And I truly think Dan Lanning is the guy that can get them there. But the player of the game is Dylan Gabriel, who went 23 of 34 for 183 yards and 3 touchdowns. However, he broke an NCAA record and now holds the record for most touchdowns responsible for in a career with 180. Oregon plays Wisconsin next week. Oregon State Beavers played against San Jose State and lost 13-24. The story of the year has been the Bees offense struggling, and it continued to struggle this week. And that's with the quarterback not named Giovanni McCoy under center. But this game is winnable. Oregon State was held scoreless on 3 different trips to the red zone. Oregon State will play Air Force next week, a very winnable game for the Beavs. Now, your Portland State Vikings played against Idaho and lost 30-39. Now, this was an awesome game to watch. It was a one-possession game for 55 minutes until Idaho would score with 2 minutes left and get a 2-point conversion to ice the game. This game was decided up front. Idaho ran for 257 yards, and PSU was held to 134 rushing on 44 attempts. That's really all there is to say. The game was literally back and forth. Idaho was just the better team right here. Player of the game, Deshaun Buchanan, who rushed 22 times for 212 yards and 2 touchdowns. Portland State will play Montana next week. Idaho will play Weber State next week. Now, your Western Oregon Wolves played against Angelo State, and they lost 16-38. It's a tough loss, but they're still 6-2 in conference play. Western Oregon will play against Central Washington next week. Now, your Pacific Boxers played against Willamette and won 24-10. Now, when the weather gets cold and it gets wet, and it does in the Pacific Northwest, you have to be able to run the ball to win games. Luckily for Pacific, that's what they've been doing all year. Well, and they did it this game too, to the tune of 308 yards rushing of offense. Player of the game, Brody Bantalina, who rushed 26 times for 191 yards. He also set 2 records today. Most rushing yards in a season and most rushing yards in a career over at Pacific. Definitely impressive records to hold. Willamette will play Lewis and Clark next week. Pacific plays George Fox next week. Now, your Eastern Oregon Mountaineers played against Southern Oregon, and they came up short 21-49. Coming off last week's upset against College of Idaho, I wondered, can Eastern Oregon keep it up and possibly knock off Southern Oregon? To put it bluntly, they couldn't. And they couldn't stop the run. They couldn't stop the quarterback from methodically picking them apart to the tune of 22 completions. And the defense gave up 35 points in the first half. Southern Oregon dominated on the ground as they had 344 rushing yards. Player of the game, Gunnar Yates, 21 carries for 274 yards and another touchdown. Eastern Oregon plays Montana Western next week, and Southern Oregon will play College of Idaho next week. Now, your Boise State Broncos played against Nevada, and they won 28-21. Now, Boise's got to hold on and win these games to make this playoffs as the G5 representative. They're doing it really well. It's just when you see a game against Nevada with a 1-score win, you get a little nervous. Now, the player of the game, Ashton Jeanty, 34 yards rushing, 219 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's averaging over 6 yards per carry. The dude is very much in the Heisman race. And I would say with the loss that Cam Ward sustained against Georgia Tech, where he looked somewhat human, it makes it even more questionable that Ashton Jeanty maybe has a chance to take home the Heisman. Over to Idaho State versus Weber State, where they won 43-35. Now, the growth of Idaho State cannot be understated. This has been an amazing year for them. A couple of main points here for the Bengals. This is the first time they're 500 or better in November since 2018. By winning this game, they were able to bring back the Train Bell Trophy. This is their first win over Weber State in 10 years and their first win in Ogden in over 40 years. Now, the Bengals won this game by just discipline. For example, Weber State beat them in total yards. The Bengals didn't register a single sack. They didn't even force a turnover. But the Bengals had four penalties for 40 yards. Weber State had 10 penalties for 105 yards. Discipline will get you very far in football. Player of the game, Kobe Tracy, 27 of 37 for 48 yards and 4 touchdowns. Idaho State will play Eastern Washington next week. Weber State will play Idaho next week. Over to Montana, where your Montana Grizzlies played UC Davis and lost 14-30. It's a tough loss for Montana, especially when they started off hot and went up 7-0, but they need to bounce back because the season is far from over. They play Portland State next week. Now, University of Montana Bobcats played against Sacramento State and won 49-7. Montana State scored 14 points in every single quarter, except for in the 7th when they scored 7 points, but by that point, they were coasting to a win. They won this game by rushing for 527 yards. That is an absolutely insane number. Think about that. 527 yards. This allowed Montana State to become 10-0 for the first time in school history, as well as 6-0 in conference play. Montana State has 2 very good games to end the year on that, if they go undefeated in these 2 games, could make them the number 1 seed and the absolute team to beat. They play a very good UC Davis squad in a rivalry game against the Grizz. Player of the game, Tommy Mellett, who might just win the Walter Payton Award. 7 of 10 for 89 yards and 4 rushes for 46 yards and 2 touchdowns. Montana State will play UC Davis next week. Now, Carroll Fighting Saints played against Montana Western, and they lost 14-27. But this is what I think the the game of the week was, I'm going to jump in to right where the game got good. In the third quarter, Montana Western was up 13-7, and they got a stop against Carroll. Carroll, who was slightly on their side of the field, had a crucial decision to make. Am I going to punt it, or am I going to go for it? And the analytics supported in that exact moment that you should have gone for it. But old school football style, they said, no, we're going to punt it and put it in the hands of our defense. And the punt would work out as it would go out at the 2-yard line. A couple of plays later, Montana Western would actually fumble, and Carroll would capitalize by scoring a touchdown and go up 14-13. From there, Montana Western would force an interception in the fourth quarter that would lead to a Bulldogs touchdown. Then the Bulldogs would get another quick stop and go on a long, methodical 13-play, 6-minute, and 20-second drive that resulted in another touchdown. Montana Western would seal the game with another interception. Player of the game, Eli Norris, who had 9 receptions for 114 yards and a touchdown. Carroll will play Montana Tech next week. Montana Western will play Eastern Oregon next week. Now, your other MSU Northern Lions played against Montana Tech and lost 14-54. It was a dominant win, but it's what we've come to expect from Montana Tech. Montana Tech had more rushing yards than their total offensive yards from MSU Northern. There wasn't really anything huge about this game. I'm not going to name a player of the game. MSU Northern will play Rocky Mountain next week, and Montana Tech will play Carroll next week. Now, your Rocky Mountain Battling Bears played against Arizona Christian University, won 49-24. Now, this is a nice win for Rocky Mountain. They've had a rough year, so it's nice to see them get on track and get their second win. The Bears actually started this game down 10-0, and they didn't score till 1 minute and 49 seconds left in the second, but they would score two touchdowns in that short amount of time to go into halftime up 14-10. Arizona Christian would briefly reclaim the lead early in the third to go up 16-14. But the Bears kept battling, and they got better as the game went along, saving an avalanche of 28 points for the fourth quarter. Player of the game, Graydon Buell, who went 16-26 for 266 yards and 5 touchdowns. Rocky Mountain plays MSU Northern next week. Now over to Utah. Your Southern Utah Thunderbirds played against the University of North Alabama and won 38-26. Now, Southern Utah is 4-2 in conference play, which is crazy because when you look at the overall, they're 5-5. It was just such a tough out-of-conference schedule that I think the T-Birds would have been a little bit more respected had they gone with a normal, smaller out-of-conference schedule. Now, the way Southern Utah won this game was by being more physical and winning in the rushing game. Player of the game, Targi Lampson, 31 carries, 173 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Southern Utah plays against Central Arkansas next week. Now, here's the game we all wanted and we've all been waiting for. Your BYU played against Utah and won 22-21. Now, the Holy War returned, and it was 100% worth the wait. No matter who you wanted to win this game, you have to admit it was epic. BYU wearing the all blues, Utah wearing their all red, Utah saying, hey, we're going to change it up. We're not going to start Isaac Wilson. We're going to start this other quarterback. Kyle Whittingham, by the way, admitted, yeah, Isaac Wilson's been playing most of the year hurt. Now, Utah scored 21 points in the second quarter, and we went into halftime with a score 21-10, and we're thinking there's no way BYU can win. Heck, 7 of their points, or 6, which is really 7 because of the PAT, came off of a kickoff return for a touchdown. BYU can't get anything going on in this game, and it's kind of Utah's calling card, right? Utah plays really, really good defense and ball control football. Even when Cam Rising was the starting quarterback, that was the way they did things. That's how Kyle Whittingham got things done. The offense may not be crazy, but the defense is going to keep you in games. But in the second half, BYU turned it on. But it came down to the fourth quarter, where BYU was down 21-19 with 1 minute and 56 seconds left to play. BYU had the ball at the 9-yard line. They had a holding call on the defense that gave them renewed life, and it quickly helped BYU as they had an explosive plays of 30 and then 20 yards, which set up a game-winning field goal that the kicker would make and make them up by 1. At that point, the kickoff with little time left was a formality as they were able to get the stop. BYU wins and goes 22-21. Now, the player of the game, it's the kicker, Will Farron. He went 3 of 3 on field goals and an extra point. Without him, that's 10 points gone in the game. BYU loses, that's 12-21? Absolute player of the game. They go from being 8-1 to now they're 9-0. This kicker had the game of his life, and BYU needed it. BYU plays against Kansas next week. Now, do I think Kansas is a better team than BYU? No, not at all. But I do think after extremely emotional games, you have to rebound really quick because you have to play a very good team again. So it's great to have the emotions of this win, but you need to keep your head on a swivel. Utah plays against Colorado next week, who, by the way, Colorado is second in the Big 12 right now. If Colorado keeps playing the way they are, you could be looking at maybe a Colorado versus BYU Big 12 championship game, which would be amazing to watch. This is going to be a great thing to keep watching all year. There's only a couple more weeks left, guys, and it's getting to it. For instance, the Northwest Conference is officially done with conference play after next week. You're literally going to have the game between Whitworth and Linfield decide who wins the Northwest Conference against that auto bid. And it's a shame because you could easily say, hey, Whitworth decide. If Linfield wins, you could say Whitworth deserves to be in the playoffs. If Whitworth wins, you could say Linfield deserves to be in the playoffs. You put those two together, crazy game. PLU, who's been playing out of their mind, they deserve to be in the playoffs, if you ask me. You have teams like Central, who over with the Lone Star, they deserve to probably be in the playoffs. Are they going to get it? Who knows? You have teams like Wazoo. Playoffs are coming. They only have 2 more weeks left. You have teams like Oregon, who should be there. You have teams like, Montana State. Heck, you could even make an argument for maybe Eastern Washington, just based off of how Eastern Washington is able to rise to the actual occasion, but they don't show it as much. You can make the argument for Carroll to be in the playoffs. You can make the argument that Montana Tech should be there. Montana Western should be there. Those are really the main ones. You can make the argument that Southern Utah deserves to be playing some football. You can make the argument that BYU deserves to be in the playoffs. When you go in and you think about it, there are multiple different teams that are part of Pacific Northwest that deserve to be at playoffs in their own respective conferences. And this is one of the reasons I started Pacific Northwest Sports. We are deep in our history. We're also amazingly talented. It's just sometimes we don't get the national recognition we should. Boise State, another team that should make the playoffs. All in all, it's going to be an amazing week. Here's what week 12 looks like. You have your UW Huskies playing against UCLA. WSU plays New Mexico State. Eastern plays Idaho State. Central plays Western Oregon. Pacific Lutheran plays against University of Puget Sound. Whitworth plays against Linfield. Oregon plays against Wisconsin. Oregon State plays against Air Force. Portland State plays against Montana. George Fox against Pacific. Lewis and Clark against Willamette. Eastern Oregon against Montana Western. Southern Oregon against College of Idaho. Boise State versus San Jose State. Idaho versus Weber State. University of Montana Bobcats. Montana State Bobcats, UC Davis. Carroll against Montana Tech. MSU Northern against Rocky Mountain. That is a game against 2 teams who have struggled this year. That's going to be another very impressive game to see who wins. Wyoming plays Colorado State. BYU plays Kansas. Utah plays Colorado. Utah State plays Hawaii. Utah Tech plays West Georgia. Southern Utah plays against University of Central Arkansas. It is an amazing week. However, I have a wedding I am going to on that Saturday. So Sunday, there may not be an update to put out for you guys on Monday. If that's the case, please follow our Twitter so we can keep sending you the updates. But I promise you that on 11:30, we will have multiple updates to go for, because we're also going to be posting throughout the week about playoffs and who makes the playoffs for these different schools. So please keep listening. We enjoy the support you guys give us, and I love making these things possible, making these summaries for everyone to listen to. That being said, everyone have a great week. I will talk to you next week or the week after. We will see. Have a great one. Bye.